Hi, everyone. My name is Eva Matthews-Lark. I'm the program manager at Hog Island Audubon Camp in Maine. Welcome to our Making Bird Connections lecture series, where we bring a bird-focused presentation to you each week on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. These presentations are free, but donations are encouraged to help fund our programs. I want to thank you for everyone who has already donated. We really appreciate your support. Also, please consider checking out our other programs on our website, hogisland.audubon.org. This week, we are proud to have the Vice President of Boreal Conservation at National Audubon Society joining us, Dr. Jeff Wells. Jeff is a researcher, an author, an on-the-ground creator of partnerships, especially with groups working towards boreal conservation. Jeff has also been an instructor at Hog Island, and he continues to push our work in equity, diversity, and inclusion. Tonight, Jeff brings us a presentation about Indigenous conservation, Boreal Birds of Canada, and he has a special guest that is going to be joining us by phone. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate having you here.
Well, thank you, Eva, and everybody for being part of this. I wanted to just start off by saying I'm going to be kind of talking about the Boreal Forest and its significance and its conservation from my own Western science personal perspective, and then later we're going to have some perspective from a good friend of mine, Ray Rablauskas from Poplar River in the Boreal, who will be talking about it from his perspective as well. So it should be interesting to kind of hear about all these different aspects of this. I wanted to start off with kind of a story, and let me see if I can get my share screen going here. Let's see. Eva, are you seeing my my slide there?
That looks great.
Okay, good. So, May 28th, 2018 was a day that will go down in birding history. It was the day that the largest sheer number of North American songbirds, in this case warblers, was ever seen in one location in one day. Even a non-birder would have been startled by the numbers. I think an estimated 721,000 of these brightly colored gems of the bird world passed by those fortunate birders that unforgettable 9-hour day. It happened in Quebec along the north shore of the St. Lawrence at the Tadoussac Dunes, a 3-hour drive northeast from Quebec City. And these are some actual photos from that amazing day. 144,000 bay-breasted warblers passed by those birders that day. 29,000 Blackburnian warblers. 108,000 Cape May warblers. And while these birders were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to document this abundance, the fact that it was possible to even have 700,000 warblers in one place at one time is because of a special place they were migrating towards, the Boreal Forest, what we like to call North America's bird nursery. And, you know, another more recent event that's happening right now that is also because of the Boreal, many of you may be experiencing, is the winter finch invasion that we're having. You know, the siskins that are coming down in droves, and redpolls and pine grosbeaks and evening grosbeaks and red-breasted nuthatches and all sorts of things, all courtesy of the Boreal Forest. If you look at the world's original forests, this is kind of a map of a reconstruction of what area they covered. We know that only about 20% of them have never been cut over, are still fully intact. And it turns out that the Boreal Forest has around a quarter of those forests that on the globe in the course of human history have never been cut over with large-scale industrial forestry. The Boreal Forest is a massive area, 1.5 billion acres. It stretches from, as you can see in this map, interior Alaska, all the way across Canada, kind of sandwiched in between the Arctic and the prairies, and then all the way to the Atlantic coast to Newfoundland and Labrador. And it is still about 70% intact, or by that I mean more or less free of large-scale industrial impacts. The Boreal holds more surface fresh water than anywhere on Earth. It has 4 of the world's 10 largest lakes. It has North America's longest undammed rivers. It's an area that has immense carbon stores in its soils and permafrost and peatlands and forests, and it's still sequestering lots of carbon, of course. It's an incredible biodiversity cradle, as we say here in the slide. Although most of the world, and certainly most of North America, has lost its large predators, there are still wolves and bears, wolverines that roam across the Boreal. There are still herds of caribou and populations of moose and all sorts of creatures that still have healthy populations in the Boreal. When we think of the world's last great migrations, if we think of mammal migrations, a lot of times we think of places like, Africa and the Serengeti Plains, but many people don't recognize that the Boreal Forest, or the Boreal biome, is home to one of the world's large mammal migrations left on Earth, that of caribou, some of which travel 500 or 1,000 miles from the tundra into the Boreal in winter and back again. And then, fish migrations up undammed rivers, sometimes, 1,000 kilometers. And I know in so much of North America, we have so many dams, fish can't get up rivers very far at all. But these are places where these fish migrations can continue unfettered. And of course, the birds. We've done some modeling work to look at the number of birds that occur across the Boreal. It is an astounding number, about 400 species that nest there. But what is particularly astounding is the total number and variety, really. Sometimes birders, when they think of the Boreal Forest or Boreal birds, they think of birds like the Canada jay, the whiskey-jack, a bird that people from many parts of the U.S. will travel up to Maine, for example, to try to see. Maine's right on the southern edge of their range. But the truth is, along with Canada jays and black-backed woodpeckers and boreal chickadees and spruce grouse, the ones we think of as Boreal birds, there are a host of birds that are reliant on the Boreal for nesting in particular. And it ranges from small birds like warblers and sparrows to waterfowl, to woodpeckers, to shorebirds like yellowlegs and dowitchers. In fact, we estimate there's 1 to 3 billion birds with a B that nest in the Boreal Forest, and and about nearly 100 that have half or more of their entire world population nesting within the Boreal Forest biome. There's a number of species, about 33 here, that have basically almost their entire 90+% of their entire population breeding just in the Boreal Forest. It is a place that allows great abundance. I talked about that in the opening, but these are some numbers about some of the abundance of some of the birds that breed in the Boreal and then come south to flood through our areas in migration and in winter. They're some of the reasons why we see so many of these birds in migration, why, driving along a road in rural Maine in mid-October, you flush clouds of dark-eyed juncos and white-throated sparrows, for example. It's because there are just large numbers of them that are able to nest in this still intact landscape. Birds like the white-throated sparrow, and of course I'm going to play a little bit of the song just because it's so beautiful. Let's try that. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try that again. One more time. Of course, white-throated sparrows do breed down into places like Maine and the northern states. So it's a familiar sound to those of us who live here, but it's one of the most familiar sounds across the Boreal Forest, because that's where the largest proportion of all the world's white-throated sparrows nest. This will just give you a little sense from our friends at Cornell, a map that they produced using eBird that shows first where the birds spend the winter, white-throated sparrows in this case, where most of them spend the winter. And I'm going to hit the button and you're going to see what happens in the spring as they suddenly go flying all up into the Boreal Forest. And then later in the fall, and where this is about now, where they're coming back down to spend the winter in our area. Juncos, another one, dark-eyed junco is one of the most common birds. You know, it's one of the birds that is found in one of the most frequently counted birds in Great Backyard Bird Count, for example, because there are just so many juncos that come flooding out of the boreal. Favorite birds like ruby-crowned kinglets. And of course, some of the birds that go even further south, birds like the blackpoll warbler. This kind of is a graphic summarizing some of the newest migration work that a variety of scientists, including Bill DeLuca, who now is working with National Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative, which is looking at mapping out all of the migration routes and important stopover places and wintering areas for basically all the birds of North America eventually, so we can have a better sense of the connections and what needs to be protected along the way. And you can see how all these boreal black-throated blackpoll warblers kind of come east, drop down through the eastern U.S. and eventually spend the winter in northern South America. So some amazing connections there between the birds of the boreal and places like Central and South America. These are birds where birds breeding in Ontario spend the winter, and you can see the darker orange colors are where there are more numbers of those, and you can just see the importance of the Caribbean, southern Central America, parts of Mexico, and northern South America, Colombia and Venezuela in particular, as major places where these boreal birds from Ontario go to spend the winter. So we know that the boreal forest is critically important for a huge number of birds, incredible connections to the rest of the world. But we also know that it is a place that is seeing mounting pressures from all sorts of large-scale industry. Less than 12% of it is currently protected. And there are a few birds that we know of that are particularly reliant on the southern part of the boreal forest, where the largest amount of loss of habitat and fragmentation of habitat has happened. That's the red in this map. Birds like the evening grosbeak, and it's a bird we know has declined by, well, this says 78, but I think it's even higher, a higher decline. And many people remember back in like the 80s when you used to just see massive flocks of evening grosbeak satcher feeders, and we just don't see that anymore. We've done a little bit of analysis, and it turns out that if you look at their boreal range, there's about 4 times as much land that has been disturbed primarily by forestry as has been protected. So 9% protected, but about 39% that has been impacted already. So we do see lots of impacts, and that's why protection of land, conservation of land is so important in the boreal. The newest science out there is really changing what we know about conservation everywhere, and this applies, you know, in the U.S. and Latin America, the Caribbean, all around the world, and in the boreal. There was an old benchmark years ago that we should protect about 10% of the landscape. Studies showed that was vastly underestimating the amount we needed. More work has shown that it has to be much higher. Right now, the world bodies, UN bodies, are looking at trying to institute a new benchmark of 30% protection by 2030. And we're trying to advocate for that as a step along the way. One of the interesting things about this kind of a benchmark coming from Western science is that Indigenous leaders across Canada have applied and sort of known from traditional knowledge and their own perspectives that the amounts that have been advocated for protection were not enough. And one of the most exciting things in conservation right now worldwide is the leadership of Indigenous people, in particular across the Boreal region of Canada. Indigenous people are pushing forward land use planning and conservation initiatives that are the largest conservation measures in the world. The growth of protected areas as a result of the work of Indigenous governments and communities and people is the most amazing amount of conservation that has happened for 100 years, and yet the world knows almost nothing about it. And in a sense, Indigenous people are doing the most significant bird conservation work in the world right now, and yet unfortunately not that many people know about it, and hopefully more will. You can see the growth on here. These are millions and millions of acres that have been protected over the last 20 years or so. And it spans across the country, and there's just more and more happening right now. I just want to point out a couple of places on this map here. If you look at on the left side in the Northwest Territories, there's a large pink area labeled Nene. That's a place that we have talked about in some of our work, and in fact, a woman from the Nene, from the community of Lutzelk'e, which is the First Nation that has moved forward the protection of this multi-million acre area. She actually came to Hog Island a few years ago. I think Eva met her when she was here, and so we have a real connection there. And then I want to bring your attention, if you go down to the bottom center of the map, where in Manitoba you'll see some dark green and a label that says Pomacho and Niki, and we're going to be hearing from Ray in a little bit about Pomacho and Niki. Along with this amazing movement for large-scale land protection across the Boreal Forest, hand in hand with that has come the recognition that we need to have people on the land who are the rangers, the guardians, the people doing the monitoring, watching out for people on the land and for wildlife and for the land itself. And as part of this, there is an ongoing movement called Land Needs Guardians, and I hope some of you will find this website. It's just literally landneedsguardians.ca, and lend your voice of support for this. This is one of the other critical pieces of conservation success, because one of the issues for so many of the communities that are advocating for these land protections is that there's also a need for some economic opportunity. And rather than having people from sort of outside coming to do the ranger work and the stewardship and park work, it makes the most sense to have the people from those places being the ones to do that, taking care of the land. In Australia, the government there funds about 700 of these positions annually with Indigenous communities, and we'd like to see the same thing happen in Canada. And there's a lot of wonderful information about this and why it makes sense at this website I show here. And I'm proud to say that one of the voices that is on a video of support, along with many Indigenous leaders, is our own David Yarnold, president of Audubon, and there's also, I can't show you on here, but if you scroll down this page, there's people like actors like Harrison Ford and some other very famous people, along with various politicians and others who are all voicing their support for this really important movement. And I hope all of you will look into that too. Now, this gets into a little bit more detail than probably most of you would care about, but just to give you a sense of the way Audubon is trying to be allies of this Indigenous movement to really help advocate for the ideas and the plans that Indigenous governments and communities are moving forward. We sort of have four parts of it, voices for boreal conservation, which is trying to be amplifiers of the stories of these incredible places and why it's important to continue supporting them, and to try to find spaces for Indigenous people to be able to talk about why these are so important. We work on boreal conservation science to support both new protected areas and stewardship and monitoring of existing areas. And then we have a category we're calling just Indigenous collaboration, but that's sort of trying to have an opening for being able to be careful listeners to our Indigenous allies to find out what ways we can be helpful and to collaborate. And finally, we're hoping to be able to do something with boreal birding and ecotourism as another part of sort of economic development strategies that can be helpful to communities. In my earlier time, I spent about 15 years working for the Boreal Songbird Initiative, and have just a year and a half ago or so brought that same program over to Audubon. And in those earlier years, one of the things we did was bring writers up to the Boreal to get them to then be wowed by it and write about it. And I don't know if anybody can recognize some of the people in this photograph that I brought up to the Northwest Territories. This is in Yellowknife, but that's Scott Weidensaul, who's a Hog Island instructor in the front there, and Pete Dunn in the back with his wife Linda, also who have been instructors at Hog Island in the past. So I had to throw that in there because of the connection to Hog Island. We got to go to places like Delaney, a 600-person community, the only community on Great Bear Lake, which is one of the world's largest lakes. And this community is actually doing some amazing work right now to try to protect millions of acres around their lake. You'll probably be hearing more about that in the next years. We've brought even birding groups up to places. This is a group from Audubon, Pennsylvania, we brought up to Manitoba, and this is at famed Churchill, Manitoba, birding there. So lots of different ways. Even in more recent times, we're putting out information and writing about new protected area proposals like this in the Seal River watershed in Manitoba. Audubon Magazine's done features. This is one on the Fedene Nene Park that I mentioned earlier, that was highlighted in last year's magazine. And the magazine's been very supportive and interested in this work. They just actually hired an Indigenous journalist to do a story on that they're going to be putting out in the magazine in the next year or so related to the Boreal. So just lots of opportunities for trying to raise awareness about the importance of these places in this work. One of the areas that has been a bright light in boreal conservation and Indigenous conservation is the Pomacho Niki World Heritage Site. It's a group of 4 First Nations traditional territories are in eastern Manitoba and parts of northwestern Ontario. And the group worked with the Manitoba and Ontario governments just diligently for years and years and years to move forward protections and then to get a World Heritage designation. And we're going to talk more with Ray about that, but I wanted to show you a little bit of context here of where we're talking about. This is in green, the World Heritage Site in Manitoba. and you can kind of maybe see the inset map there. We're talking an area of millions of acres of beautiful boreal forest habitat. And at the very top of the map there is where Poplar River First Nation is located, and I've kind of zoomed in there, and you can see all the complex network of rivers and streams and lakes and ponds throughout this area. Just kind of a little bit of a sense. And then just before Ray comes in here, I want to just quickly show you something I kind of zoomed in on Google map earlier today, just to show you where this is. And if you look down in the corner where you can see Maine with a green triangle, that's roughly where Hog Island is. And then if you look up in the center, you'll see another big green triangle, and that's roughly where Poplar River is in Manitoba. And I'm just going to hit a few of these slides to kind of zoom in slowly so you can get a sense of where we're going. There's that huge Lake Winnipeg, one of the world's largest lakes, but often not well known to the rest of North America as one of the largest lakes. And one of the things I wanted to, I'm hoping Ray will say something about this in a second when he comes on, is I noticed when you zoom in on Google Maps, it doesn't say Poplar River for the community at first. It says Neganan, and I hope he'll tell us more about about that and what it means. And then if you zoom right in here, I'm going to just end here with a close-up of Poplar River with the airstrip and the elementary school and the nursing station and the Northern Supermarket, and introduce Ray Rablauskas, who is going to, I think, introduce himself a little more thoroughly and tell you more about his thoughts and perspectives about Poplar River. Ray, are you there?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I was unmuting myself.
The story.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. I'd like to get going. And actually, as Jeff had mentioned, my name is Ray Rablauskas, and Poplar River is my home. It's the home for, and we live right in the middle of the Boreal Forest. My children live here, my grandchildren live here, and we as a people in our communities, this one and around, we want to be here for a long time. Our community is well. A bit more about myself. I am right now. I work for Poplar River. I'm their traditional lands program coordinator, and also their guardians program coordinator. And I worked here for probably 40 years. We did work as a traditional lands coordinator as well at all that time. The community itself is about 1,200 people. It's a Anishinaabe community. Anishinaabe means, it's the name that people here call themselves. It means the people, and that's how they identify themselves. The community is remote. We don't have an all-weather road access all year round. We are connected by winter road 80 miles south of us, or 80 kilometers south of us, to our next community, which is Burns River, and there's an all-weather road to the city from there. There has been literally little or no development in our traditional territory. Even though we're not that far north, it hasn't been accessible, and our elders and our ancestors here have looked after and cared for that land very well, and for a very, very long time. They're the original guardians, and we get people are telling us, what did they do? And if you just leave it alone, the land will still look after itself. And that may be true. Our people here have really, they've lived on that land, and they've taken care of it. They've protected it from development on their own. Literally thousands of years. We have archaeological proof that people have lived here for 7,000 years, at least 7,000 years. It's been much longer than that. And I just remember, Jeff, we mentioned on the map, it's called Neganan, we're not sure where that name came from. We think it might be a Cree word. It's not an Anishinaabe word. Poplar River's name is Asati Zipe Ake, which means Poplar River land. Maganan is more like a postal designation. It never has been the name of our community. Our own archaeological proof of 7,000 years, at least 7,000, and we've had through our own knowledge and the elders, we know it's been, people have lived here in this area a lot longer than that. There's a traditional song that we still sing. It's been passed down for thousands of years, and it talks about it's like a prophecy of what's going to happen. It talks about the ice age coming. It talks about the Creator cleansing the earth and making way for new growth. And that shows that song still exists. That's a very old song, and so that alone lets us know that people have been here for a while. And people used to travel all the time. They weren't static. They didn't stay in one place. People from the community would go inland in the late fall, and they would spend the winter in the thick bush where it's much warmer, and they would hunt and fish and trap, and that's where they spent their winter. And then in the spring, when the ice started to melt, they would start moving on the river towards the lake, and they would spend the summer out on Lake Winnipeg. There's lots of islands out there on the lake. It's part of Poplar's traditional territory, and people used to live there and fish. They would fish and put up fish and smoke fish and get themselves ready for the winter, and then they kept going back and forth. When the government kind of moved in on the community and the churches, they established schools in the community and churches and different things, and it became people were told their kids had to be. They built schools here, and our children had to go to school, and so they ended up living in this area that we have now with a reserve. It's treaty land that we live on. The reserve itself is not very big. It's about I think it's 2 miles wide and maybe 4 miles long. But that's the reserve, and it's actually federal land in the midst of the province of Manitoba. So that once they started to move here, then some families would still go out, some families would still take their kids out, and some of them still do today, although not many. I mean, they were it was against the law for them not to send their kids to school. And they would travel. The men and the young men and the men and the elders would hunt and fish, and come back and forth and come home during the off season. It was the reserve land. Maybe you could see it on there. It's in the mouth. It's at the mouth of the river where it's Lake Winnipeg. It was over probably about 30 years ago that our elders were very concerned about development that was starting to come to the community into this area and into their traditional lands. There was hydro development that they were talking about. There was people wanting to expand logging in the area, and they wanted to do a lot more of the mining. They were looking to develop gold mines or whatever they could find. And there's some traces of, not exactly here, there's some traces. Maybe there could be diamond mining. I'm not sure. And people stopped them from doing that all this long. And after 30 years, 30 years ago, they came to us, like my generation, the generation that I'm in now. I mean, I haven't lived here all my life. I've been here for 40 years, but the generation that's here now, and they asked us to do something because they were finding that they would go to the government and they would tell them, please we don't want that development in our area. They were beginning to tell them that the Creator gave us this land to look after. They gave us a responsibility to look after it. And governments, as you know, maybe they do yet, but at that time they didn't pay much attention to that. So they were worried that they weren't being listened to. And so there was quite a few of us. There was actually lots of us. And we worked with our elders. And they with their work and with their guidance, we carried out complete land use and occupancy studies. We did a few archaeological studies. And what we were trying to do was to establish an area that we could call or recognize as our traditional territory. And with that work and lots of other stuff that we were doing, it turns out that our traditional territory is approximately 2 million acres. It reaches from Lake Winnipeg almost to the Ontario border. So we were able to do that. We were able to establish our traditional territory, Poplar River's traditional territory, as a protected area, and the provincial government, by law, they gave us that designation as a protected area. And that protection means protection from logging and mining, hydro development, or any major industry within that traditional territory in that land. The land itself it's mostly made up. We have lots of, as the maps may show, we have lots of lakes and rivers. The forest is mostly jack pine, spruce. There's poplar, there's tamarack, and there's a lot of willows. And we have lots of wetlands, muskeg, and we have tremendous. Just as Jeff talked about the birds, we have abundance of life in this area, as you can imagine, in a place that's still is very pristine, or not quite pristine, but it's very, very pristine. We have lots of fish, lots of plants, we have lots of trees, all kinds of animals and birds. The land is very, very beautiful, and you can feel it. The land is very strong, and the people here are the same. They're very strong and they're very beautiful, and they're trying so hard to care for the land that they believe was the Creator put them there to look after. They call this area, the whole area, not just our neighbors. They call it Pomacho in Niki. In English means it's the land that gives life. That's not a. It's hard to translate a lot of those words. Land that gives life is a very simple explanation. But that's the only English that fits. But it makes sense. And it's not just the life, the physical life. Like we don't rely as much on wild foods and fish and most meat and geese and ducks and rabbits. People still use to eat that food, and that food is medicine to people. There's lots of berries. There's lots of all kinds of plants. There's lots of medicine plants, and some of them people are still using today. And the people, the ancestors here, have practiced that true sustainability of the land. That's why the land is like it is today. It's much harder today. Things have changed a lot for Anishinaabe and the people in this area, and they have suffered through colonization, assimilation. You know, the language is very close to being lost. A lot of their traditional beliefs were taken from them when they were forced to go to residential schools. But that's not the part that I just mentioned those to say that those things have happened. And now people are starting, as Jeff mentioned, all over the country, they're starting to realize that you know, we're not blaming what happened to people here, but we're moving forward and we're trying to find that healing for our community and for our kids and for the land. Our elders actually, they were worried about the youth. They were worried about even the way our generation here were hunting and fishing. They weren't following the ways from before, where they never took too much. They only take what they were needed. And they also believe that land is healing. It's healing for us and for people who come here. They actually feel that land, that's healing. Part of what we were taught is that there's a circle of life. That's that teachings we have, and all life fits on that circle. All creation fits on that circle, and human beings are just part of it. We're all side by side, and each one of us on that circle, which where the fish are, every bit of creation is on that circle. No one is more important than the next one, and the Creator gave jobs to each of those parts of that creation. They told them what their job was, what they were to do, and how they were to live together. And one of the ones that humans are the ones that they believe that they were given the responsibility by the Creator to look after the land, and that was one of their main jobs. And we're the ones that, so far that I know of, have we haven't done a good job yet, and we're still trying. The other teaching from there is when we lose one of those, even just one of those, even if it's a bug or a small animal or a small bird, if they become extinct, then the land suffers for it, and so do people. So this responsibility to look after the land it came from the Creator, so it's a sacred responsibility. And we've been working over 30 years to fulfill that, trying to understand that responsibility and trying to work together with our communities and other communities, which Jeff mentioned. When we started working, probably it was around 1998, which is a while ago, we started working with our neighbors, Little Grand Rapids, Pongassi, and Bloodbane First Nations. And we met for years together to talk about how we can work together and protect land. And one of the main parts that came out of that was to look for creation of that World Heritage Site. So we asked the province to work with us, and so we spent probably 18 years or maybe a little bit less than that, developing a nomination, and things worked well for us. Canada put us on the potential site for World Heritage that they nominate each year. And after 2 failed attempts or unsuccessful attempts in 2018, we did receive that designation. It's a mixed culture and heritage site. I think it's the first in North America. And we saw this designation as important to us as it is to the world, because it's those are all of our communities that are involved. They have the same. They have protection from development, and that's it's almost 10 million acres of land that's being protected and looked after, and that World Heritage Site is a strong designation for us. It gives us additional protection. And Jeff also mentioned that we do have a land guardian program. We've had one here for quite a while. And that's where our own people are out on the land. They're monitoring it. They're traveling the land. They're making sure that the land is safe and healthy, and it's large. I mean, it takes a whole summer to basically even. I don't know if we could travel all the land in one summer by canoe, but that's the way that we do it. And they monitor all kinds of things. Lately we've done some work where we were glad to work with Jeff on that, with those recorders we put out to listen to the birds, and we've done it for I don't know how many years now, quite a while. And my son Norway, who's he's the land guardian, he works with Jeff as well, and it's fascinating to all of us to listen. We don't recognize as many birds as Jeff can. He knows everyone that's on there, which is good to him. We've been doing some work with the monitoring and doing research on the land itself. And we know the land is drying because of climate change. A lot has changed since climate change. So a lot of different things have happened to us. We know that it's drying, and we have a fear of forest fires. 2 years ago, we had a fire, and it was basically in the middle of wetlands. And normally nobody bothers it. It goes out, but this year it kept going, and we ended up being evacuated that time just because of the smoke. And we do we've done the research as well with using traditional knowledge and science research, and we hope that the research will give us the information and the knowledge that we know to be able to better care and be able to make better decisions on stuff that happens on our land or areas we need to look at. And we've been unfortunate in a way that over the years and also through some of our youth are slowly losing the connection to the land. The schools have taken over the teaching. Everything was taught by the elders, and they're not recognized as they were before. Schools has taken priority. So our elders told us again that we have to change that. We have to go back to the way it was. So we did start taking kids out in the land with elders, and we brought them out to camps way inland in the bush, and those camps were meant for lands teachings and traditional teachings, and healing ceremonies and all kinds of. It was actually a wonderful experience for us to go there, and we went there for probably 15 years. It has made a difference. We're slowly, our youth are starting to look after things, and they're interested and they're trying. Another thing that we did that in the last few years, we created a map. We went back and we were looking for all the traditional names that in our traditional territory, and you can imagine if people have been here for 6,000-7,000 years, they have names for every little place, and most of them are not remembered anymore. The maps that are on the names that are on their maps, they came from someone else. People here don't know where they came from. So we started working with them, and for over 2 years we created working with our elders. And we've created additional 150 names in our traditional territory. If we had started that maybe 30 years ago, or even 25 or 20 years ago, we would have had way more than 150 names. We were fortunate that we didn't completely neglect that, so that now we have those names. And both the province and the federal government now recognize those names as the recognized name along with the English name, and that the names are very important. And what I have here is as to how to describe that. I have a quote from one of our it's from Sapphira Brauskis, and what she says, and that'll describe it better than what I can ever do. She says, "Our own place names on the landscape are telling stories of the land we recognize as a traditional territory of our people, the Anishinaabe of Asativizipi, and all the life that grows there." And that means that what she's saying is that's the people of Poplar River. I'm listening to and talking about our place names is like reading a book, telling stories of the landscape, the animals, birds, fish, plants, and people. Those named places ensure that these stories will carry on sometimes for thousands of years, and they have. We know that they have. He says, "My father and grandfather would come back from the land and would talk about and describe the places they had been. And the Anishinaabe names of those places, they were teaching us the stories of the land so that we could always remember them. When my father was describing where he had been, he would say, Kiape Nametowak, which means in English, as best I can say it means he could still feel the presence of the people who had been on that land before him. And the stories of our ancestors are connected to those places and to us by the name places." And that's the Fai's quote. And that's I don't know if I think that. Oh, it's almost time to go here. I hope I was clear and I didn't ramble too much, and I hope it's helpful and that you actually I hope you gain something from it. And I really I'm sorry I have to leave, but I want to thank you for your time and for allowing me to speak about this place and our people here. And I wish to thank you for the work that all of you are doing in the Boreal Forest, and for those birds and animals that you're trying hard to protect. We need partners, and we're happy to have partners like you. We're happy to have partners like Jeff, who has become a good friend of our community. Miigwech.
Thank you, Ray, and
Thank you, Ray, so much.
give our best to everybody.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for leaving. I really feel bad about that, but it's okay. And if there are questions that you want to ask Jeff, and that he can't, if he doesn't know, you could write them, and I could respond to them if they send them to me. I really don't like. I hope that people listening will understand, and maybe we'll have a chance to answer those questions for them. Thank you. I better leave. Thank you, and goodbye to all of you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, Jeff, thanks for inviting Ray to come and share with us his wealth of knowledge about what is going on in his own community. I certainly see lots of people in our chat who really enjoyed hearing from him tonight, and also for the presentation that you gave on the Boreal Forest and the conservation work that's going on there. At this time, I'll move things over to our questions. I know some people have been dropping questions, but if you have any questions, we are going to open that up for Jeff. And if we can't get answers from Jeff, then we'll certainly be reaching out to Ray for more insight. So if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the comment or the chat section. And I already have a few here. Jeff, I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen, or do you have other photos that you would like to show us before we move to that?
Well, I was going to see if I could just let it run through some more while we were talking. But,
yeah,
I can't.
That's fine.
Get it to move for some reason, but anyway, go ahead, and I'll just see if I can figure out how to move this forward.
So one of the questions that we had was about the World Heritage Site, Pomacho, Niki. Ray mentioned that provides more protection. Does it provide? Do you know if it provides financial money for research and other things other than just land protection?
Well, the designation itself, I think, has limited financial, help from the body that designates it. Although, it does kind of raise it in awareness, and it does meet. There probably are some funds that are possible to access, but for the most part, it's not largely a funding opportunity. The communities have been working to put together funding sources of different sorts to try to increase opportunities for ecotourism and for other kinds of activities there. So it's still really an ongoing issue that they're continuing to work on. And interestingly, we've been partnering with the Pomacho and Niki Guardians to try to pilot Audubon's Climate Watch program with them. The program was kind of focused on birds in the U.S., and so we had to add some species to make it relevant up north. And one of the things we discovered was the Guardians didn't even have binoculars. So when we're asking them to look for red-breasted nuthatches for Climate Watch, it's a little tough without any binoculars. And so one of our chapters and chapter leaders just a couple days ago is gonna sponsor getting binoculars for the Guardians. So that's just a small little help for them. They were hoping to be able to put it into their budget for next year, but we're hoping to just get them in their hands earlier so they can start doing that. That's a very small thing, but there's clearly still a need for more funding for their work, and that's part of what they're trying to do by coming together as the four communities together. They have more ability, more capacity to try to look at government funding and that sort of thing. And that is one of the pieces that Audubon's part of a group that's trying to advocate for the Canadian federal government and potentially provincial governments to be supporting guardians programs and stewardship work like that, as well as potentially ecotourism and things like that. So, that's part of what we see as our role, is trying to help encourage government to step up to be helpful financially, so.
Right. We have another question. This one's from Kevin. He asks, how much of Canada's boreal forest is private versus publicly owned?
Basically, all of it is so-called crown land, what we would call public land, although its designation as to what will happen to it is not set. And that's really the question right now. Much of it is still open to mining claims and forestry and oil and gas in certain areas and other sorts of things. And so it's not a situation where anybody has to go out and try to buy up pieces of it. It's just a matter of trying to get it designated as protected versus just being open for any kind of industry. And that's what the Indigenous governments and communities are doing, is trying to decide what areas should be protected, and then bring along the federal and provincial governments to add their designations for parks and things like that. Sometimes we've seen examples of Indigenous governments declaring something as protected, and then the provincial government, for example, in Ontario, this has just happened, will go in and just give a mining permit right in the middle of the place that the community just designated as a protected area. So clearly, you have to get the province and the federal government on board to make sure it's protected under all of those pieces, and that's what these governments are trying to do.
Our next question, you've been talking a lot about the boreal forest in Canada. This one comes from Linda. She asked, what about the boreal forest in the United States? What are we doing to protect it?
Yeah, well, I've been in having some interesting conversations with our Audubon's Alaska State Director, Natalie Dawson, and with Nada Culver, who's Audubon's Public Lands Director. They're both also quite new to Audubon just in the last couple of years. Actually, we all arrived on the scene at Audubon at about the same time. So we're sort of still thinking about it, trying to figure it out. In Alaska, it's a bit more complicated because of the past settlement acts and so forth that happened during the Carter era, so that have really made a kind of a complicated patchwork of federal and state and tribal lands. And so we're sort of all trying to look at ways that we could be helpful there, and putting together some strategic thinking and planning to see how we could move forward more protections. There's perhaps not surprisingly, the current administration has been doing some things a little bit behind the scenes to try to undermine some of the conservation potentials and desires of some of the tribes. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity to change some of that in coming years. It's not a very satisfying answer, but we're trying to figure out a complicated situation there to see what ways we could be helpful to tribal entities, tribal governments, and maybe tribal corporations in Alaska.
Since you're your title Vice President of Boreal Conservation, what exactly is Audubon's role in working with these guardian groups and in the protection of this land? Maybe just give a little bit of information about what your role is and how Audubon's work is moving. How do you see it moving forward?
Yeah, so earlier, probably was a little bit confusing. I tried to put up that slide with those 4 different kind of strategies or areas of work, and one of the big ones is the communications work. I called it Voices for Boreal Conservation, but it's as we know in Audubon, convincing political leaders, governments, and the public that they should support these things is often the sort of root, at the root of what you have to do. And so that's part of what we're constantly doing. And most of these Indigenous governments really don't have a huge amount of capacity to do that sort of work. So anyway, we can be coming alongside to give them voice and give them an opportunity to talk about what's going on and grow that support is crucial, because that ends up kind of resonating back to the politicians in Canada, especially if an international group, a U.S. group is talking about it or getting stories about it in the media and things like that. So we have and will continue to do a lot of media work in Canada as well, but we also try to do a lot internationally and just try to kind of keep these things in the news, build lots of public support for them, and find ways to do it that's respectful of the leadership and making sure we're doing it. We work with a group called the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, which is made up of Indigenous people and leaders from across Canada who help kind of coordinate and figure out how to work with different First Nations and communities where we may not have direct contact, and help sort of just to do it strategically. So that's one of the big things we do. We do, the science work we do is based in both kind of looking at the ways that the boreal is globally special, if you will, and we've done a variety of reports and publications on that over the years, and we'll continue to do that. We're working on a report right now on the importance of Indigenous lands for birds, actually. We hope to have out in the next few months that'll really just highlight how some of these both current and proposed Indigenous protected areas, why they're important for birds and what birds they're important for and how many birds and things like that, and why they are sort of refugia for many of the birds that are being pushed north by climate change. And we also do a lot of work with these specific Indigenous protected areas proposals to figure out, how many birds are there, what birds are there, how much carbon is there. Sometimes, figuring out what kinds of trees and the, numbers of lakes and streams and all the things that make them important, sort of. And helping to write those right into the proposals. A lot of times these land use plans and protected area proposals can be, hundreds of pages long, just have to be full of all kinds of detailed information to make the case. And so we try to bring whatever expertise we have around that to the table. And then, as we're thinking more about other opportunities for collaboration, we're looking at opportunities for, are there situations where Indigenous guardians would like to have more knowledge about birds and training and monitoring, and some of the connections with Hog Island are related to that. We've been thinking about in other parts of Audubon where we have some expertise there, and are there ways we could share that expertise in a way that would be helpful to the communities and to guardians programs. All of it we try to do in such a way so we're not imposing our ideas on the Indigenous governments and communities, but we're just offering what we have, and if it's seen to be helpful, then we're looking at ways that we can find the funding and the opportunity to make that happen.
Earlier, you mentioned donating optics, and just now you mentioned potentially helping with some training. What can folks do at home right now who are watching if they want to help with boreal conservation? Is there any concrete things that they can do to help support this kind of work?
Well, I mentioned that that Land Needs Guardians website as a way to put your name on the list of people supporting it, to help grow support for that as we're trying to move that. That's kind of a slowly growing movement where we're trying to, like I say, trying to get the Canadian government to really raise the amount of money it puts towards that. So putting it in the international spotlight by being on board with that. If I could have gotten my slides working properly again. I had a slide about a kind of a cool thing that actually Florence, who the elder who came to the Hog Island camp from Litzelkay, is part of a new initiative that Litzelkay and Thedene just is announcing, I think maybe simultaneously as we're having this show, a new basically like an online craft store cooperative that's selling these beautiful beaded artwork and jewelry and specialty items as part of their kind of economic sustainability model that they're trying to do for the community. And I'm trying to, let me see if I can just find, I'm not going to share the slideshow here with you probably, but I'll just find the name of it. If you wanted to just get involved with something you could do, it's called, oops, I lost it again, sorry. It's called Caribou People Creations, cariboupeoplecreations.com. So, is there a way for me to screen share again?
Yes, you could screen share again. I just stopped so that we could do the Q&A.
See if I could find let me just try it real quick. See if I can do this without making a big mess. Sorry. And I'll show you if I get this right. Whoops. Well, this is the website that they just put out. I think they were doing like an announcement on it. I noticed just this tonight. So, these are small things for supporting some of this. I have this final slide here, if you can see it, that has websites for both our Audubon Boreal work, where you can stay up to date with the most recent work we're doing and announcements of different things, and as well as the Pomacho Niki website and a number of the other websites that are part of our kind of group of partners that we work with. And then on the right, one of the things that if you're into social media, get hooked up to these Twitter accounts if you do Twitter or Facebook. And then, when you see things coming out about different issues related to Indigenous conservation from these places, all of under Twitter. One of these is my Twitter account, but some of them are other partners, and we are constantly pushing out stories, just trying to maintain these things in people's eyes, and new stories, positive stories, all sorts of things, and trying to push those forward. I have a couple of resources there that if you wanted to hear some of the sounds that we recorded up in Poplar River on those recording units that we had a picture of along the way that Ray mentioned, and some videos and things. There's some links there for those who are interested at some point in doing something kind of more substantial and lasting. We hope we'll find some opportunities for that. And of course, people I'm happy to have people get in touch with me if they have ideas for something, kind of some big idea or some big funding opportunity or anything like that. Of course, always can find me just jeff.wells@audubon.org. Like all Audubon folks, we have emails, just our first name dot last name @audubon.org, jeff.wells@audubon.org. But we hope that if you are following any of these sites, including our Audubon site, you will see things coming up and ways you can be supportive. And as we start getting our program more well developed at Audubon, I expect there'll be more and more of these opportunities. And I hope that, we're talking with Eva about, connections with Indigenous guardians, with the Audubon camp, and there may be more and more opportunities where we're kind of connecting, and maybe, sending some Audubon people up to some of these communities and First Nations to learn from them as well. So we have kind of a back and forth learning experience happening, and out of that, hopefully more and more will grow.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. That those links are really helpful. I've dropped some in the comments of the chat so people can check those out. There's definitely a wealth of information on the Audubon website at those links, and there's always new articles coming out, some of them directly from Jeff. So we're really glad that you could join us tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it.
Next week, on Tuesday, November 17th, we will host our last lecture in the Making Bird Connection series. We're proud to have our very own Dr. Dawn Lyons presenting on seabird tracking. And our Bird Connection speaker will be Charlotte Runzel. Charlotte is a policy analyst at National Audubon Society. And lastly, I want to introduce a new program at Hog Island called Turn the Page, our newly launched book club. And I will just share our website. You can learn more if you go to hogisland.audubon.org, and you can see all the details about our book club. Here is, I think you could probably view this, but if you go to our website and you click on Turn the Page, you'll see that we're going to launch this program in January, but we are selling it now for the holidays. So our first books will be with a brand new book called Birds of Maine, and we'll have one every month after that until April with Scott Weidensaul's newest book. So I invite you to check that out. It's our very new program, and I hope that you will all join us next week on our last presentation. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Jeff, and also for Ray coming tonight and sharing all of your information about boreal conservation. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, everything's turned off. So that's streaming over on Facebook, Jeff. We had about 200 people watching here in Zoom. We had about 122 people here in Zoom, but we had about 200 people watching over on Facebook. And then that will just keep running continuously. So we'll have a few more thousand people seeing that in the next 24 hours or so. But yeah, thanks for having Ray join us. I thought that worked out well. And I was really happy that you could really highlight something that most people don't even know about. I was looking at that website that you sent, and it was saying that it's a third of the boreal forest, a fraction of the planet's boreal forest found within Canada was saved in that World Heritage Site. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's incredible stuff, and you know, there's stories, so many stories all across the boreal. You know, when you start getting down into it and the people and everything, it's just full of amazing places and stories. And I'm hoping we can learn more and more about how to do these presentations jointly with different Indigenous people from all these places. You know, on my end, I'm still trying to figure out how to make that happen and how to make it so it's not too much of a task for people. You know, so it's not too hard, and that people are comfortable with it. You know, and that's part of it, is just kind of discomfort and just sometimes technology. You know, it's hard to in some of the communities, you know, there's not even a good good internet connection, and sometimes even phone connections are very spotty, and so it's hard. It's really hard, but we're going to keep working on it, and got another one in the spring. We're doing that. I have somebody who's he's the biologist for the Indigenous, one of the Indigenous governments in the Yukon. So he's going to be part of it. He's not an Indigenous person himself, but he's their biologist. So he's been there for decades working as part of the community. So kind of trying to find different ways to make this work, and I think that's going to be fun, and I hope we can figure out just more of them, so
Yeah, I think some people, just one suggestion that I saw in the chat was some people wanted to see what Ray looks like, because we're so visual, and they can see me and they can see you. And I kind of looked on the website and I couldn't find a picture of him, but I did find an interview with his son that I posted in the chat. But that's something to share in the future, like, having people like to know who they're hearing from. So maybe that's something you want to incorporate. And know that not everyone likes their photo taken or have photos of themselves. So I also just like that you had photos of the land and of the people, and I thought that was a really nice representation.
I talked to him about that, and he said he just didn't want to. He wanted to just do it by voice only. So well, I thought it worked well with all the photos of the, it's a beautiful place, and it did highlight some of the things that he was talking about. So I thought that was really nice. One person in the chat said it was like a audio postcard, so it like painted a picture, and I thought that was a nice way of describing it. So yeah, good work. Thanks so much. I do really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll keep working together on more things. Yeah, well, the folks at Pomacho and Niki, as you know, had before all this happened, the COVID, they were hoping they were going to come to camp this past year. So they're very interested. So I'm not exactly sure who I know, but of the folks, but I hope maybe next year we could actually have folks actually from Pomacho and Niki, so it'd be sort of like this kind of a reinforcing, of the connections there, and maybe same thing, at some point with the Dene Nene, especially, now that they're trying some different. I thought that was really interesting that they opened this new shop. If you get a chance to look at those, it says who made the different things, and it mentions Florence,
nice.
certain things, and it has pictures of I don't know if they're how much volume they are going to be able to do of handmade goods. I hope they can do it in such a way that they make, that it's worthwhile. They're trying to, I think, have the prices be, high enough so that it's, because they're really there are pieces of art, really, it's like, it's buying art, really. I mean, if you look at them, so for people in the US, the prices are actually probably quite low, to be honest, but I hope they're gonna, it's gonna be something that's worthwhile. But it was kind of cool. I looked on there and I saw, something, I think they were some kind of beaded moccasins by Florence Catholic, Oh, wow, that's cool.
Oh yeah.
So
oh yeah, and I see some from other Holy Family members of hers, Joseph Catholic.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at this website. A lot of, it's beautiful. And someone has put together a really nice website for them. That it looks really great. Well, I'm glad we could highlight that. And I will be sending out links to people from today's talk. So we put those in the chat, and they're on the chat on Facebook. And also we'll be sending them out to our participants on Zoom so that they can hopefully support all these initiatives, and you know, this is timely for people to buy things the holidays, so why not put their money to good use? And
yeah, it's sort of like a very like concrete thing somebody can do that's not a huge, you know, thing,
right.
but it's helpful. And once it seems like if somebody just doing that act of that one thing, you're going to feel like you're going to feel connected and want to know more and keep staying. And both, I should have said this, both Pomacho Niki and Tadeni Neni have like monthly electronic newsletters now. So if people go to those websites, they'll see that, you know, probably. But so you people can sign up and just stay in the loop with what they're, you know, what they're doing. And so yeah, I'm hoping actually both of those places that we could start figuring out some ways to be helpful in thinking about promoting birding ecotourism there. That's something you know, if we'd had a little bit more time with Ray, I might have asked him more about, you know, if people wanted to just visit, you know, what, I mean, obviously not now, but when COVID is over, you know, what are, you know, most, several of the communities, maybe all of them have at least, you know, some kind of a lodge or something, you know. It's not, they're not all super elaborate, I think, at this point, but there are probably opportunities and growing opportunities. And actually, looks okay, you know, with the Tadeni Neni, they just actually purchased a lodge that was like an existing kind of famous lodge, fishing, mainly for fishing, but it's like a kind of a high-end fishing lodge, and they're taking that over. And I've kind of wondered if they would be thinking about, you know, adding birding to that as well.
Yeah.
So
That's an interesting thing to think about. I know, yeah, I'm sure there would be interests of groups to go. You know, I don't know what we can do at Hog Island to support that, but it's a possibility. So we should keep that.
yeah, you know, or even finding some ways to help, like, develop the capacity if they're, you know, so that they can be, you know, doing it, but just this to help show them the ropes, kind of like what are people expecting when they are going to do a bird trip, you know, like what would they be expecting? So what do you have to line up, you know, for your programming and your facilities and transportation, et cetera, you know,
Right.
just, you know, the nuts and bolts of it. Because once you have that figured out, you know, then the advertising part, you can find people to help you advertise, you know what I mean? And in fact, probably like this is something we are hoping to explore at some point, but, you know, I would not be surprised if it would be possible to get, for example, up there, the Northwest Territories tourism department, government, to help put some money up in helping to develop these things. The same thing in Manitoba, the Manitoba tourism department, you know, might be very willing to put money up to help support those efforts. If, you know, if we had like a, you know, kind of a joint kind of vision for what that might look like. And I've been trying to put together a preliminary just a webinar from our Colombian birding trail work, to have our Audubon people and the Colombian government that supported that work together do a webinar for some of the Indigenous nations and provincial governments and of Canada, to sort of, it would make them feel good to showcase their work to another country, of course, but also just the reality of, look, this is something we're doing as part of our economic development project in Colombia, and, you know, we have some expertise, and we'd be willing to help think about how you'd set that up, or to give you a model for how to do it based on that work there, maybe. I don't know. So, and the Venezuelan folks, I mean, Colombian folks were all interested in doing that, you know, right when I was down there for the board meeting, right? But then all the COVID stuff happened, and you'd think it would have been even better because we could just do it all over, webinars, but it just seemed like it all snowballed out of control. But
Yeah. Well, we'll keep the conversation going. Thanks so much, Jeff. And for those who stuck around to just hear us chat, it's nice having all of you here tonight. And we really, really appreciate you supporting Hog Island. Hope you have a good rest of your week.
bye-bye, everybody. Thanks, Eva.
Bye, Jeff.